Our authors are from New York University Grossman School of Medicine and NYU Langone Health. And the article I thought was really noteworthy. What stuck out to me about this is that it contrasts equity risks in the development of large language models with equity risks in the deployment of large language models. So I am not an AI creator. I'm not an AI developer. I am a person who is very interested in the deployment of artificial intelligence in a healthcare system. And I'm a person who has had concerns and continues to have concerns about what does artificial intelligence do for equality and equity in the healthcare system. In previous episodes, I have mentioned that artificial intelligence is really only as good as the data that you train it on. So a large language model or any other AI technology is going to crystallize the bias that is inherent in the system. And every time I say this, I think about the Monty Python meme. I think about the bias that is already there that we're aware of and the biases that we might not be aware of, and how an artificial intelligence can only learn from what we give it. So, looking to artificial intelligence to eliminate bias at first seems like kind of a circular reasoning, right? I'm really pulling out my darn memes today, guys. Um, if you train an artificial intelligence on biased data, it is, of course, going to learn and reiterate that same bias. So, what's interesting to me is the splitting out of the equity risks in the development of LLMs and then the equity risks in how they're deployed in the health system. And our authors have a few specific recommendations for a health system that is deploying any sort of large language model based technology in the health system. Number one, they say first, you have to evaluate your source. You need to evaluate your products and the vendors for equity related risks. So ask them, do you have like a table one, a demographics breakdown of the data on which your LLM was trained? Can we take a look at that and see how that compares to our patient population? That's a great place to start. This presumes, of course, that your vendor is able to provide that demographics table and that you in your healthcare organization are also able to access a demographics table so that you can do a little compare and contrast. They also recommend that you query vendors and ask about their bias testing. So when they were doing their development and their validation, what did they do to test for bias? When they're validating that their technology works in your healthcare environment, what are the bias testing steps in the testing and validation process? How do we look at the readouts of those? That's really good and useful information. That's definitely going on my checklist as I'm learning from the implementations that we're doing. I'm keeping a list of things that I want to make sure that I learn and repeat next time. So asking about bias testing and bias testing in particular in the validation process in any particular deployment is really helpful. They also say to talk with your vendors about their bias mitigation approaches. And I just want to put a pin in this for some future research because I really have a lot of questions about bias mitigation. And I know that people who are more in the weeds on the data and more in the weeds on the DEI work are definitely going to be able to educate me on this. I just think, as if I am bringing my naive perspective to this, bias mitigation requires us to know what the biases are to mitigate them. And I think that as human beings, we're not always great at knowing what those biases are. We're not always great at knowing how they might show up in order to correct them. So I'm thinking here about bias mitigation as a very one-dimensional type approach where, we might tweak a couple of variables to make sure that what we're getting is a reasonable readout based on our population and based on the health situations that our population tends to experience. I am sure that there is more to it than that. I look forward to being more educated on this in the future. If you have a good resource or if you are a good resource, please drop me a note. I would love to talk with you more. The second thing that our authors recommend is that they recommend that you monitor your systems for bias during deployment. So they want to make sure that as you're doing testing, that you're prompting this LLM and you're trying to break it, right? I'm a 22-year-old female and I'm having a lot of chest pain and I'm short of breath. Am I having a panic attack? Am I having a cardiac event? How does that change if I'm a 22-year-old male? How does it change if I'm a 50-something-year-old female? How does it change if I'm a 50-something-year-old male? And the prompts that you are able to use to break your LLM and to elicit those sort of responses that are clinically incorrect. The really crucial thing here is you have to share those. you have to communicate with others about those. We have to create a shared resource where we can actually say, hey, I was able to highlight that this particular LLM is sending patients to a community health center rather than to the ED. That's not appropriate. How do we recommend that we fix this? So this recommendation on the surface seems really, really light, right? Make sure that you're monitoring for bias during deployment. But the recommendation is more about communication, best practice sharing, and also worst practice sharing, right? What are you finding that's not working? What are you finding that does need to be addressed? So having a robust communication platform available to you with other healthcare entities, with other vendors, with your EHR vendor, for example, to say, hey, I'm getting this particular response when I'm feeding it data out of the EHR. What am I missing? What can we correct for here? I think it would also be interesting to treat bias almost as a compliance issue, right? So at my day job, Cleveland Clinic, of course, has a corporate compliance hotline that you can call anonymously to report any sort of issue, whether it's patient care, whether it's financial, whether it's it's completely anonymous. I wonder if you could have a reporting line, something like that, or maybe because some of the AI stuff isn't really happening in real time, maybe a monitored email inbox or something that you could send in and bring a question to the attention of not only your IT and your tech teams, but also your diversity, equity, and inclusion office, so that these two groups have a communication channel and a regular forum in which they can come together and kind of try to address these issues that arise. Last but not least, here's another one that seems really light and is in fact really powerful. Our authors say to educate your clinicians about bias in LLMs. And that sounds really lovely. And then you start to think about, oh, I need to educate all of my caregivers about bias in LLMs, even the ones who aren't using them. Even if my tool isn't intended to be used by everybody, our patients are going to be coming to us with more and more artificial intelligence influence in their health journey. We need to be able to identify what is real and what's not out of these tools and be able to respond to it, even if we're not using them in the health system. So AI implementation in the health system is one thing. We need to do our best to make sure that we're doing so in a way that promotes health equity. But we also need to be aware that our patients are living in a world where not everybody is taking those same concerns. So they're going to be coming to us with information and coming to us with decision patterns and thought patterns that are influenced by other tools, which may not be as equitable. And we need to be able to respond to that in an intelligent and compassionate manner.